Experimental Podcast 1 on the Anti-Dem channel, in which I am basically testing out my new microphone, bought completely with user donations, to see if it works. But I'm not just going to post a pointless mic test onto whatever medium this is. I'm going to actually give you some content worth listening to. In which case, right now I've got one irradiated Watson, who is a reactionary writer, bon vivant, and man about town. Say hello.
Hello, guys.
And we have just watched the first 2 episodes of Season 1 of the BBC series Black Mirror.
That is the first time I've seen it.
Yes, so that would be Episode 1, The National Anthem, and Episode 2, 15 Million Merits.
So I'm about to, with Anti-Dem, give you a hot take on my impressions.
So, this series, for those of you who have not seen it, is described as a Twilight Zone for the internet age, in which all of the things wrong with our society, all of the foibles and faults of it, come right to the fore in a way that's dramatic and somewhat satirical. So, is that about what you got from it?
Yeah, no, I've heard those lines, those words, those phrases, those sentiments 1,000 times before. And 95% of the time, it's just what people would want you to think in a very unfunny way, showing you things that people already think. And in a way, this show didn't really break any of those lines, but it did manage to bring out the faults in society in a meaningful way that one could relate to, rather than just being trivially true.
So, first, before we get into Episode 1, what are your thoughts sort of on the series overall as you've seen it?
Well, it's only 2 episodes, so I can't say, but I if I can project into the future and try and feel a pattern, try and kind of guess at the writer's production. There's talent there. There is. They clearly want to pick on some of the worst aspects of humanity that are around right now, and not the typical ones, the modern ones, the things that we can quote unquote relate to. Oh, those are the worst words that have come out of my mouth in a while.
Well, the black mirror of the title is a screen. So a cell phone screen, a TV screen, that is the black mirror, and we are staring back into ourselves in it. And,
interesting.
And just as the Twilight Zone sort of took on the fears of its time, there was a lot about nuclear war and, Cold War paranoia and all that, and Rod Serling would take his time to give you the old civil rights lecture every now and again. This one's definitely internet age, cell phone age, it's Xbox age, which got touched on a lot in the second episode.
Yeah, I think it falls into some of the same traps as the Twilight Zone, in that even if you watch the episode and it moves you, and you feel fear or regret, or that something needs to change, it still leaves you sitting there with nothing. It's like the world is awful, you're doing things that are clearly pointless or meaningless. You're living in a soulless, materialist world. And at the end of the show, and I don't fault it for this, it's a difficult thing to do. I see everyone else going back to their normal lives and doing exactly what they were doing the day before.
It certainly doesn't offer any answers.
Yes.
And it's not afraid to be bleak.
Yes. And the show certainly touches on that. The second episode especially was very much, I found the answer, it's meaningless, and I'm going to do what they want me to do and just go on, kind of roll with it.
So let's start with episode 1. So, episode 1, the national anthem, starts in Britain in the modern day. As opposed to the second episode, and I think most of the other episodes, which are sort of near future science fiction. This is right in the here and now. So a young princess of the royal family is kidnapped, and the kidnapper issues an unusual demand for ransom. He doesn't want money. He doesn't want anyone released from jail. But in the YouTube video in which he announces his demands, he demands, well, Watson, why don't you tell the people what he demands?
I won't repeat his demands, but they were explicit, inappropriate, and creative. We'll just put it that way. They were meant to put the Prime Minister of Britain in a very compromised situation, which he would never willingly put himself in.
Yes. In short, he wants the Prime Minister to fuck a pig on live TV.
I didn't say that.
No, but it's...
Let it be noted.
Yeah, though it's... Yeah, that's what it is. There's a certain senselessness to it, but also a certain sense to it. I mean, the Prime Minister... Neither the Prime Minister or the Princess has done anything wrong to this person so far as we can tell. It's not revenge for anything, that anybody did to him. It's his way of... Okay, remember that Twilight Zone episode where there's this sort of suburban town and the people basically go crazy with paranoia, thinking that there's like an alien invasion, and they finally shoot one of the residents there, thinking he's an alien, and the real aliens at the end reveal themselves and go, aha, all we have to do is get these people all paranoid and they'll kill each other off. I think it's The Monsters Are Coming on Main Street, I think it's something like that. There's a certain element of like that here, because there's a certain element of, I'm just going to set something in motion and watch the world go crazy. Mm-hmm. So he sets this in motion, and the world certainly does go crazy.
This really reminds me of Son of Brocklander's recent Wimerica episode, where he talks about voyeurism. And that's what I got a sense of when I was watching it, was that once the demands are made, he has to do it, publicly, and it has to be nationally broadcasted. That's part of the demands. And as the episode turns out, he never actually needed to do anything. But because people had to watch, had to be there, had to comment, had to get their opinions, had to be on social media, and he cared about their opinion, being a politician, that opinion was everything. Everyone misses that the princess has been released 30 minutes before the deadline, because they're all indoors, glued to their TV screens, the Black Mirror.
Well, the first thing, they declare a press blackout on coverage of this. And what's interesting is, so there is a law in Britain, if the government gives the press an order, they can't report on something. There is a blackout law, you can do that. Which there isn't in the U.S. However, it quickly becomes very apparent that the blackout law is going to do absolutely nothing. Because, you can shut down TV channels and radio channels from talking about you, but for one thing, satellite TV brings in every news channel in the entire world. So if people aren't hearing about this on BBC or Sky or something like that, they're going to hear about it on CNN, on Fox, on Al Jazeera, on, Russia Today, on everything. There's so many cable channels, you can't stop it. And also, even if you could stop all of those, you can't stop Facebook, you can't stop Twitter, you can't stop all of that. Even the YouTube video, they have it taken down, within 15 minutes, they said, something like that?
Yeah.
And it gets downloaded, it gets cloned, there's 1,000 copies of it on the internet, and they just can't get rid of them.
It was like that recent video a few months ago that was put out by some poll group on the immigrant crisis that kept getting shut down on YouTube. They'd take out the audio, and it had 1,000 mirrors, and it was being spread all over Facebook. It was one of those interesting things where I saw kind of a breaking of the boundary of people I actually knew in real life sharing that video. It was because it was so viscerally effective, and people had to watch.
Right, and this brings up something else, which is, I wonder if the mass media age is coming to a close. I mean, there was a article on Gigahome a few years ago about how mass media really is a blip. We didn't have this before a certain point, before the newspaper started getting popular. People just passed news around mouth to mouth. And now it's almost like we're going back to that, except they do it, via Twitter or via Facebook. Mm-hmm. Are we getting to a point where mass media is just going to be obsolete altogether?
I don't know if it'll be obsolete altogether. I still think there is a place for it. It's certainly a demon that won't die. And certainly, as we've seen, as the internet hasn't been as open as it claims to be, and in a way, there might be more of it, but there's still an element of the mass media that kind of lives on, a spirit that lives on in many of the online publications. But to your point about things being spread by word of mouth, I absolutely celebrated it. When I was growing up, people used to say, don't believe everything you hear. And my teachers would tell me about, how it's important to get information from good sources, and, you got to go to the right authorities. And, of course, great sources are what? The government, the newspaper, or a school, right? Those are the trusted sources. And as I've gone on, I'm trying to think, well, one, are they relevant? 9% of the information that these mass media sources are putting out isn't particularly relevant to my daily life at all. And two, it's a filter. Even before the propaganda comes in, the actual information they're presenting to you is filtered by their choices. They're choosing what information you see, and that affects your perception of reality. And I think that going back to the sort of localized news, something that would have a real great help for people, because people would fall back into their tribalist spheres. They would fall back into their local environment. They would fall back into getting information from people they care about. And even if the quality of information actually did decline, even if the mass media was the answer, at the very least, it would be information that mattered. And I would rather see a city fall into believing myths and stories that weren't true, but were about them and the world around them, the world they actually saw and lived and touched, than them be consumed by a truth a world away.
But is that where the internet's taking us? Because, I shared a JPEG the other day on my normal fag Facebook, which was, the proportion of, like, how cool a friend you meet on the internet is to how far away they live. And you can absolutely be guaranteed that if you live in, Phoenix, Arizona, that your coolest internet friend is going to live in Tanzania or, Mongolia or something like that. Because, it seems to be we're getting more globalized in stuff like that.
I think that the way the internet is functioning, it's losing a lot of the localism because of the globalism, but at the same time that we're seeing a lot more fileism. And that in part is the research that was done a couple of years ago looking at social graphs. Twitter itself falls into this problem, and they probably didn't disaggregate the data enough to quite discover the level of it. But at the very least, there's a red-blue line between the two social graphs. And I'm sure if you broke it down more, people tend to talk to people who think like them and who see themselves as like them. And that's what I'm talking about as philism. If you use Twitter as your news source, you're getting your news from people within your file, or at least tangential to it. And that's the sort of philism I'm talking about. And I wish it was localism, but even if we can't have localism, we can have philism through social graph being, segregated and separated out and minced out by, interests and such.
So another thing that gets brought up. So there's this part where they bring in this sort of fetish porn actor and try and get him to double for the prime minister by putting him behind a green screen and having him wear a green hood so they can digitally put the prime minister's face in. So they're going to have this guy do the pig and fake that it's the prime minister. Well, it doesn't work because someone just happens to pass this dude in the street, takes a picture of him, posts it on Twitter, and all of a sudden it's all over the place. So here's another question, which is, what is privacy in an age where everyone is carrying a high-definition video camera with them at all times?
This is one of those questions which kind of feels almost contrived. It's one of those questions that the news media might want you to ask, and some talking head with a lukewarm IQ would ask while talking in a Valley Girl accent to the woman next to her. What is privacy? Sorry, my terrible acting skills. I swear, Black Mirror has better acting. But when I think of what is privacy, I think it's sort of this part of the post-1950s American dream of living in the suburbs and having a space to yourself. And I think as we've gotten further away from 1950, that space that we wanted to ourselves has grown and grown and grown. And even as our most intimate moments could be taken in a snapshot and shared to the rest of the world, there's a certain anonymity to being able to walk down your own block, your own street, and potentially your neighbors might not even know who you are, have never talked to you. And that's certainly different on different blocks, but I've lived on a lot of streets where I didn't know anyone in the neighborhood, nor did I particularly want to. And that anonymity is the kind of privacy that a lot of people would dread if they actually thought about it. Not that anyone can see, but that no one cares.
Well, people certainly do care in this episode.
Oh, they do.
What's interesting in this, and there's almost sort of a little anti-democracy spin on this, is, and this is a common theme across both episodes, how quickly public opinion just gets totally altered. So in the first episode, they're doing insta-polling about whether the Prime Minister should go through with this.
Should the Prime Minister commit this indecent act? News at 11.
The public starts out saying he shouldn't, and then they switch at the drop of a hat after the kidnapper delivers what seems to be the princess's finger to a news station. Which makes it visceral, which makes it emotional. It's almost like the refugee kid who ended up face down in the surf in, where was it, Greece or Turkey or something like that.
He's not even a refugee kid, but go on.
But that sight made it real for people. And all of a sudden, they emoted on the issue. And this does the same thing. Somebody makes it real for them, and they emote through it, and all of a sudden public opinion flips, and they want them to do it.
Yeah, that kind of reminds me of growing up. Growing up, the big topic, perennial topic, was violent TV, and did it make kids violent? And there was always this moment where you tell some older person, like, I know it's fake, it's not real, and it is. Seeing something violent or dangerous doesn't always make it real for you. And I can see how seeing that finger, seeing the blood, seeing mortality, the blood that makes you mortal, that's what made it real for people. And I'm not sure if that happened, whether that would actually make it real, but it's certainly plausible that some event that reminded people of mortality, whatever it was, some violent action, would be the difference between making it real and making it just voyeurism. And that kid, I imagine a lot of women were thinking, what if that was my child on the beach?
Yeah, exactly.
And at the moment that happened, all thought went out the window, because they would think I would do anything for my child.
Uh-huh.
And that's certainly the end result, the telos of Alinskyite politics, is making politics personal. And the American media is experts at making every piece of politics personal.
Well, there was a piece on, where was it? I think it might have been another Why America Weekly, about the special interest story.
No, I don't remember that one.
Or it might have just been his Ryan Landry's blog, where he's talking about how fake and manufactured the special interest story is.
Huh.
But it's one of those things that it makes it personal.
Mm-hmm. I've witnessed a friend go through a special interest story episode, and I certainly do remember. I watched them get interviewed, and then this is old news and all, but they chose the worst part of the interview, just cut it together and made him say something that either he didn't say or he didn't say in context, and that was the entirety of what they chose.
Well, think back to the Bush Sr. ad with Willie Horton, and how they flipped out. You can't do that. Well, what they forget is the Willie Horton ad worked. I mean, it gave a public face to certain fears. And that worked. It was able to, turn a political thing personal. And that's what people make up their minds on.
Mm-hmm. I can't tell you how many people I know who they say they have principles and are reasoned, yet you go through what they like about candidates, it's all personal. They did this for me. Mm-hmm. They did this that has a personal connection to me. And it's no wonder that when you look at the top 10 people who donated for Hillary, number 10 is Hillary. Because what's more personal than me, right?
Yeah, there you go. One thing that was really interesting about this was the little touches that they got accurate in a way that it would be easy to exaggerate. Like we were talking about, now in this, as part of it, they show snippets of Facebook and Twitter, and especially YouTube, the YouTube comments under some of these videos. And it's shocking how right they got it. This sort of callousness, this, everything personal but everything kind of a joke, this 4chan irony of it all, the hashtags they had, Trottergate and all of that. It hit a little close to home.
It was scary. That was probably the scariest part of, well, It was one of the scariest part of the episode. The part that made it feel real was it made it personal for people who use the internet way too much.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was like, oh yeah, no, I've seen those YouTube comments. I know that guy. Not that I know that guy, but like, I know the guy, the type of person who posts that sort of comment.
I know that guy. I've been that guy.
What has 6 legs and is funny?
Oh, what?
What? Oh, it was one of the YouTube comments.
Oh, yeah.
Was
Yeah. What has 6 legs and is funny? Oh, yeah.
We'll let you guess. We'll let you watch the episode to figure out that one. But yeah.
So yeah, we won't quite give away the ending of it, whether he does or he doesn't. But that's almost beyond the point.
It is. The episode could have ended with those faces watching the screen, waiting to know what was going to happen, because that was the message, and I don't think that people have accepted or changed the way they tend to be very passive in reacting to events around the world. For everyone who watch something and change their mind, very few do anything, and perhaps in the majority of cases that's a good thing, but at the same time it's these emotions, at best, they lead to expression. That seems to be the highest form of art of any age, is simply expression of disgust or agreement.
Well, the guy who does the kidnapping turns out to be basically a disaffected artist. And someone remarks at the end of this that this whole event was maybe the first great piece of art of the 21st century. You know, this whole thing as a performance art. Maybe it's that the greatest art does point a mirror back at ourselves and shows us who we are, either as individuals or as people. So, again, it wasn't the obvious subject matter of, having to have sex with a pig that was disturbing about this to me. It really was how much this did sort of hold up a mirror to us and say, this is who you are.
And once again, it heads back to my original critique, which is, for all these critiques, all these people who have stood up or given TED Talks or whatever the medium is, they don't offer a solution to change people. And I think half of it is that people don't want to change. They just want to be chided for their bad habits, and they don't want to find a solution. Or if they find a solution, they want to be just as commoditized as the last one. And I think that the solution is old and easy and trite, and it's just filling our lives with something meaningful, and not meaningful in the modern sense, but actually meaningful.
So that's a pretty good segue, I think, into the second episode.
Absolutely.
So the second episode, 15 Million Merits, takes place in a dystopian future in which most people, in order to generate electricity, have to ride on stationary bikes which are hooked up to generators. And there are these big banks of people who sit there all day pedaling. And they, by doing so, earn what are called merits, which are sort of the currency of this world, and they can then spend them on all sorts of things. Among those things are the fact that they live in these little cubicles, these little tiny rooms that are just covered in screens. And the screens include advertising where you can flip your hand like with a Kinect and make the advertising go away, but it costs money to not see the ad. Which pretty much that's kind of like your smartphone. If you buy Candy Crush and you want it to not have ads, you got to pay another $1 to get the full version. Somewhere along the line, our hero, Bing, falls in love with a young lady who has a talent for singing, and basically the only way off the bikes, the only way to not sit on these bikes pedaling until you finally keel over, is to win a American Idol-like talent competition. And Bing has some huge number of credits that were left to him by his brother who died. Now he has them, and he gives them to her so she can get the entrance fee for this competition. And it doesn't go well from there.
I think this one, what immediately hit me I didn't connect to it as much because it is a dystopian future. And at the same time, it kind of fell into the same trap of a lot of dystopian futures. Unlike the national anthem, which felt real, like it could happen. This one felt contrived. And sometimes, a lot of the time, there are good stories which are contrived to tell us something about humanity, which is true regardless of the situation. And I think this one did it well.
Well, good science fiction projects the issues of the present out into the future, including projecting the problems of the present out into the future. Boring science fiction has to do with the problems of the future, because you can't connect to them. So, like, what Gene Roddenberry really wanted Star Trek to be, and you can see this in Star Trek the Motion Picture, you can see it in the first season or two of Next Gen, is he really wanted it to be about using inverse tachyon pulses to shut down rogue quasars and stuff like that. He wanted it to be these future supermen using science and to solve these otherworldly problems that we couldn't imagine now. But really, the most compelling science fiction stories are ones we can relate to because they're either something timeless or they're an extension and projection of something we're facing now. So everything that's wrong with the world in 15 Million Merits is an extension and an exaggeration of something that we've got now. Or you could even say those things taken to their logical conclusions. I don't know. Are they logical? Maybe.
I would say maybe ends.
Yeah. So
ends for sure. I don't think there's anything logical about the world. I think any idiot in charge could rearrange it to be somewhat less painful.
Yeah. Well, what's the point of making it less painful?
Well, the endless consequences of being ruled by bureaucrats, right?
Well, the one thing I actually liked about this is there's a lot you don't know. It doesn't suffer from scope creep. So you really don't know what happened to the electricity, why the people have to pedal the bikes, how they got there, who's running all of this. And it actually makes you sympathize with the characters more because I don't think they know either.
Mm-hmm.
So you're very much seeing this in terms of their world. You only have as much explained to you as needs to be explained to you. But like, for example, when the people are sitting there pedaling their bikes, they have a big TV screen in them. Looks like about maybe a 42-incher.
Mm-hmm.
And they can put different things on it. They can put TV shows. They can play games while they're pedaling. They can show like a game screen of a bike pedaling through a leafy meadow, which represents them. And they can buy stuff for their... And they have like a little me, right? A representation of them.
Like a Wii avatar.
Yeah. and you can buy stuff for your, they call it a doppel, I think. Buy hats and clothes and shoes and all that with your hard-earned merits, which you peddled for. But the whole system is designed to keep you peddling and keep you spending merits on useless crap.
Right. Because if you are spending all your merits, then you have to peddle more, and you never get a little break where you're not peddling.
Right, exactly.
The economy is set up that you're always having to peddle. You're not going to get a vacation, and you're never going to have to take a break where you're going to be peddling less.
Right. So, essentially these people are slaves.
Right. They're wage slaves in their company town.
Right, exactly.
Which is a very shitty company town.
Yeah. But basically, their money is more or less worthless because it won't get them off the bike.
And it won't get them anywhere else.
It
can't even buy them something physical besides food.
Yeah. You could buy maybe very, very mildly nicer food, but that's it. You're not even gonna get better clothes for yourself. You can buy better clothes for your doppel, but not for you.
Mm-hmm. And it reminds me, I think one of the things that kind of odd in my reactions was, the thing that struck me most was how crude all of it was. Like, the doppels are very crude, the shows are very crude, the entertainment is very crude. It's all cheap green screen, like cheap bad effects. And it's like, the people who are making the show, it's like the most crass and clearly exploitative of entertainment out there.
Right. I think it was, I don't forget if it was Marx or it was Lenin that famously said, religion is the opiate of the masses, but that dude had never seen television. That's the opiate of the masses.
Right. It's the sort of thing you would imagine putting, these aren't old people, but this was kind of like the equivalent of Wheel of Fortune for millennials. If you get my drift. It's the sort of thing you could see them sitting there for hours and kind of watching, kind of mindlessly, not really being entertained, but at the same time not being so bored that they flip it off.
Yeah, it's designed to distract the slaves.
Yes.
To keep them motivated to peddle so that you don't actually have to pay someone to stand there with a whip.
Right. And there was an interesting theme throughout the show that was very understated, was that the bikers were trained to hate the trash cleaners. And it was kind of an interesting little class conflict where the bikers are encouraged to bike because if they stop biking and get fat and then become trash cleaners, then everyone will hate them. So it was an interesting kind of contrived class dynamic, but at the same time, it almost felt like it was a dig, very, very unintended dig against the sort of mass media, because the standard narrative for why people hate other people is that because they're told by their stupid parents, right? Their parents raised them wrong, and someone in their life raised them wrong, and they don't know any better, and they're just told to hate people. And the concept of being taught to hate people is certainly a theme that's touched on in science fiction, but it's a very dangerous theme, because at some point you have to realize, well, what if you turn it back on our society, who do we hate and why?
What's interesting in this, there is almost like a genuine Marxist theme in some of it. But what's interesting is we've gotten so used to sort of, the Frankfurt School cultural Marxism, where it's all about, the rainbow flag and the race relations and all of that, that, like, getting back to genuine classical economic class struggle Marxism is almost refreshing.
I actually agree. I think there's something that's part of the reason why Trump is so popular is that he's not spouting Marxist rhetoric, and he's not even using the words working class, but there's something implicitly working class about his persona and his attitude. And I think after the kind of massacre that came in the rise of China on a lot of the working class, there is kind of this old sentiment. And I actually read a New York Times article written by some pseudo-conservative, who said, why has the Democratic Party abandoned the working class? And it's because they don't need them anymore. They were the first. They are the spurned lover who's grown old and has some wrinkles on her now, and she's wondering why her ex-husband is off with some younger lover, and now on his fourth marriage. And that's what the left is right now, and that's the working class is there. They're the spurned lover.
Well, look at Black Lives Matter, and especially them getting in the face of Bill Clinton. I think they're beginning to get the picture that, they're getting dumped in favor of gays, trans, all of these, sexual minorities. And, there's just not much time to think about black people anymore.
I think it's the same thing. I mean, if anything, the first marriage of the left was the working class. The second was women, probably. And then the third was, blacks. And then the fourth is probably maybe mestizos, but that's kind of an ongoing fling.
I think it's, what Fred Reed referred to as the sexually baroque.
I like that term. It's very true, because that term will probably lend itself to the future, because any sort of sexual identity can rise or fall in prominence, but baroque, that can last quite a few iterations.
Now, the sexually baroque. Why did you barake them? Oh, there's an old joke. But certainly the left has left classical economic Marxism way behind. There's another show called Into the Badlands, which has similarly is pretty much a genuinely Marxist show. But again, I like watching it because it's almost refreshing to see this version of leftism that hasn't been relevant certainly in this society for 50 years.
And I at some point I don't want to downplay the sort of destruction that Marxism left on the 20th century, but I wish for yesterday's enemies, just because at least they had something to them. Right now it feels like we're fighting paper tigers who just happen to be all powerful. But, it doesn't take much to blow them over. There's a billion behind them. And it's not to say that Marxism is particularly intellectual, but at least it's more intellectual than the drudgery we have to sit through today.
Yeah, at least it's not Tumblristas.
Right. And again, that doesn't make it right. It doesn't make it good. It just makes it less insulting to my intelligence.
By the way, speaking of that, I was unable to convince you to accompany me this weekend to go see BabsCon, the Bay Area Brony Spectacular, just down across the bay.
You couldn't pay me enough. I
actually, last year, because apparently he does not live terribly far away, I actually invited Common Filth to go along with me to BabsCon, and he also declined.
This seems to be an ongoing thing. I was actually taken on one tour of degeneracy already in the Bay Area, and I would not like to repeat any tours of degeneracy.
Yeah. Sometimes I feel so bad for Common Filth. That guy. His show really is the Dolung Bridge of the alt-right. It's like beyond this, there's nothing but Colonel Kurtz and death. There's nothing but the horror.
You know, I have been trying to work through a post, and the post was going to be called 2016 Our Holocaust. And it was just kind of the list of all the bad things that happened in 2016 that kind of just shell-shocked the right, or at least anyone who was paying attention. And to anyone who wasn't paying attention this year, good on you. That is a good habit, and if you missed all of it, for the better. Really and truly for the better. But the point I was trying to make was that the amount of sheer horror that the left has poured out this year is...
Well, we're going up the Nung River, whether we want to or not. So, the episode ends with, well, if you were expecting a happy ending, it ain't happening. So, what do you want to say about that?
I almost want to say he chooses to have a nominally better life.
He sells out.
He does. But at the same time, the episode makes the point that he traded virtual materialism for actual materialism. But he's still in a materialistic, meaningless existence.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it was noteworthy that in the last speech we see him give, he goes out of his way to say the afterlife isn't real, because he has gotten down to, just total materialism in the sort of proper 19th century German philosophy way, not like in the consumerism way. He's just given into this whole materialist dialectic, which he doesn't even really understand. It's just everything around him.
Yeah.
That sounds like it really depressed you.
Well, it does depress me because you go through life and you meet people, and I shouldn't care, but occasionally you just get this stab in the heart when someone just expresses something so utterly materialistic as in the actual philosophy, and you can't get across to them that their entire worldview is contained in meaninglessness, and if you told them that, they wouldn't care.
I think some of the space that has developed between the mainstream right and the alt-right is the sort of, country club Republican, Chamber of Commerce, business-friendly materialism of it.
Mm-hmm.
And then this sort of spirited rejection of materialism. And I think we're at the point where we're the only people who are, because whatever hippie spirit was in the left at one point, it's totally gone. And whatever tiny little embers are left, they're going to die out when Bernie Sanders packs up and goes back to Vermont. Bill Clinton made the Democratic Party business friendly. There was actually a speech, honestly, this is true, where someone asked Hillary Clinton about bank reform, and she said, bank reform won't increase LGBT rights. Bank reform won't make, same-sex marriage legal in this country. And, it was just like, that's the modern Democratic Party. It's all these, it's leftist on social issues, but oddly, again, all of the remnants of actual, the things that Marxism was talking about. You can say what you want about Marxism, but at least it started as a way to try and make things better for working class people. That whole idea is just gone.
I think part of the next evolution of the left has been, I think Obama has made peace with the military-industrial complex to a large extent.
Oh, yeah.
So, first it was the banks, and then it was the military-industrial complex. And I think the next Democratic presidency will be, again, one of compromise with pushing the new issues, whatever that may be, whatever they deem to be important. I think this whole episode could have been relabeled conservative, or at least Beltway conservative, because in a way it feels like I could see conservatives going through this sort of meaningless struggle to win more merit points for their to be a pet on some TV show.
Well, the question is, is our protagonist really responsible for this? I mean, he doesn't know what's beyond the walls that are keeping him in. So, does he even know that there is anything beyond those walls? And if there isn't, then once he does what he came to do, which was to tell the whole system off, what is there to do? I mean, look, we don't even know what's outside those walls. It could be some horrible post-apocalyptic wasteland like in The Matrix. And, there's just nothing out there to go to.
It could be, and at a certain extent it doesn't matter. But I do think that you're right. Once you've told the whole system to screw off, what are you going to do with your life?
Yeah.
I mean, why not just go enjoy what you have left? And it hurts because at the same time, even though everything was crude and simplified, it does feel like there's so much in our. I'm becoming a crank at a very young age, but there's so much of our modern world which is meaninglessness, and it's.
Yeah, but if you've never really had anything that had any meaning, then how do you know what it is that you want?
Exactly. I think that the left has done this over and over again, but they say, you know what, we can have X without X. And every time the answer has been no, you've just removed the without part. You can't have it. We can have metaphysics without religion. No, you're either going to have religion and metaphysics, or you're just not going to have metaphysics. We can have ethics without morality, or we can have ethics with pluralism, or all these things. And every time it's just we can have never happens. And
notice how often they solve that by playing word games.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I had a debate with this anthropology professor about where she was arguing there's no biological basis for race.
Mm-hmm.
And I finally, after, talking about all this DNA stuff, she got to the point where she was saying, sure, there's identifiable genetic differences between groups of people who developed in different parts of the world. It's like, okay, in other words, race. I mean, that's what race is.
Mm-hmm.
So you haven't abolished race, you've just abolished the word race.
Right.
And chosen to call it something different. Okay.
And words have power. We know that, but it affects humans, it doesn't necessarily affect them wholly. Biology comes into play at a certain place, and the world of ideas can only have so much of an effect.
Yeah. So it's like the old joke, how many legs does a dog have if you call a tail a leg? The answer is 4. You can call a tail a leg all you want, but it still doesn't make it one. All right, so anything else to bring up about either of those 2 episodes?
I think that the second episode will become even more potent as virtual reality becomes more effective and widespread. That's all I have to say.
Okay, actually, that brings up, I think, one more topic I want to talk about, which is, I've pretty much gotten to the point, and I was really an early tech enthusiast. I first used the internet back in 1994. You know, I've had computers, you know, for well over 20 years. It was something I was always really pumped about, but I think we've gotten to the point where I have as much technology in my life as I really want. And all of the stuff that's on the horizon, whether it's virtual reality or Google Glass or smartwatches and all that, I just look at that and I go, I wouldn't take it if you paid me. You know, at this point, really what I want in my life is, you know, a laptop on which I can write my blog posts, which doesn't have to be very powerful or expensive. And I suppose I grudgingly have to have a smartphone. Although, frankly, I just as soon prefer to just carry around the same basic iPod that I carried around 10 years ago. And I really don't want anything else. You know, I got the microphone I'm recording this on, but you know, that's about it. That's about all I want. Have we reached a point where you've got all the tech you want, or is there still stuff out there? Do you dream of being strapped to a VR headset?
You know, I actually was looking back, and this is a bit off topic, but I was looking back at when I used to play games more. I still play games, but I don't play it as much anymore. And after having a little break, I realized that the games I really loved and cared about were made by a handful of studios, and they were made with love and care and genius. And at a certain point, I'm like, that's what I appreciate. And I think there is technology out there that can be made with love and care and genius, and that can really be neat or entertaining or something. I mean, obviously it's not going to have the sort of meaning as media, but I think that there's probably tech out there that I could appreciate that would be useful, but at the same time, it kind of has to fit. And I'm not going to go out of my way to find something that's going to fit into my life unless it kind of just falls into my lap. And if it fits into my life the way it is, I am right now, that's great. But it seems almost that so much of the new tech it's contrived. It's a new thing to suck you in rather than something that's going to enhance or fit in the palm of your hand.
So just like the stuff on the on 15 Million Merits, where it's just, here, you earn some money, buy this crap.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, it must be said, you now have 3D waifu, so you don't need a virtual reality one.
Yeah, well, that does help. You know.
So, for the record, which is better, 2D or 3D? Keep in mind she's right next to him, so I think I know how he has to answer.
It's not a hard question to answer. I'm flabbergasted you would even ask such a question to begin with.
I notice you haven't actually answered.
Thanks a lot. Obviously 3D is better because it's actually real.
If you say so. 2D is real enough.
For a lot of people. I think that in 200 years there will be a great biopsy on the NEAT phenomenon in Japan, and I think there will be many people who will write their dissertations on that topic, if such a thing as dissertations exist in the future. I think that needs to be a science fiction episode.
There you go, maybe another episode of Black Mirror.
Deconstructing NEAT culture in Japan from a future bunker.
Deconstructing NEAT culture here. When we talk about basement dwellers here, that's pretty much what we're talking about.
Yes, but this is the thing I have to bring up. But I think there's an element where when something is far away and exotic, it's a little bit less disgusting. But when you start imagining your own cousin living there, spending the rest of her life in a basement, it's a little less interesting, a little more sad and disgusting.
There is a certain element of xenophilia.
Yes, there is a certain element of xenophilia.
You know, I actually went over and lived in Japan for a while, and I liked it, but all the ways that weebs romanticize it just don't really exist. You know, that's not really what it's like. It's a great country, but when I went over there, the things I thought I'd like about it weren't really there, but the things I did end up liking about it were things that I'd never even thought of before I showed up.
Like what?
The Japanese are just a really good people. You know, I like them. They're friendly people. They're hardworking people. You know, I really liked where I lived. I liked the way that they, you know, they sort of set up their cities and towns. I like the history of it. But, you know, it's not anime paradise.
Oh. Well, I'm sorry you didn't find your paradise.
Again, I found something good, just not what I was looking for.
Well.
That's why they say the journey is the destination.
That's very true. I certainly in this life, I certainly have found little of what I was looking for and everything I could ever want.
Oh, that sounds good. So, you are not dystopian.
For everything...
No more than the rest of us.
No more than the rest of us. Yeah. I think that there's good left, and I just need a little bit of optimism every once in a while to get me through the day.
So is Black Mirror a little nihilistic for you?
No, I don't think it was nihilistic. If anything, I think... Let me just name a show. Let me just, off the top of my head, I think maybe The Big Bang Theory is more nihilistic than Black Mirror.
Because certainly I had to stop watching The Walking Dead. I couldn't take it anymore. It was too bleak, too nihilistic, just constant sorrow and suffering. And at some point, it's like, you know, life isn't even like that. I mean, you know, even in Auschwitz, people put on little plays and comedy acts and sang songs and all that. You know, the human experience is never complete suffering. Mm-hmm. You know, and neither is it complete joy. It's just something in between.
Right. There's always an element of paradise and hell in every moment. Some are going to have more hell than paradise, and some are going to have more paradise than hell. But it's never anything but alloyed.
And that is, of course, if you believe the official story about the 6 gorillion.
Well, we know at least one of those gorillas made it to Japan.
Have I told you about my flat Earth theory?
Please spare me.
Flat Earth for white nationalism. This, by the way, is something that actually is out there on a place called Renegade Broadcasting.
Oh, well, I know about that. Everyone knows about Renegade. They are infamous for being infamous. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
As they say in anime, flat is justice. So, all right. So, anything to add about Black Mirror before we take our leave of our experimental audience here on my extremely extended mic check?
I actually wanted to make a quick comment about the name itself, Black Mirror. There's a throwaway line in one of my favorite albums that mentions a jet black mirror. And I always thought it was a potent what's the word?
Metaphor?
Oxymoron.
Okay.
A mirror can't be black, or because a mirror reflects whatever it sees. It doesn't have color, and a black mirror is just a black object. And that always kind of struck me as a metaphor for nihilism, or just nothingness. That you would look into it to see yourself, and you would be staring into nothing.
So with the black mirror in this being the screens of our TVs, our smartphones, and all of that, do we lose ourselves in them and become nothing? Or do we become a drop in an ocean?
I think that no matter how materialistic smartphone is, it still is. It does reflect a bit of us, and I don't think it's a reflection of nothing. I just think it's more soul sucking than it is soulless.
So all the problems that we see in these two episodes, is it man's fault or is it technology's fault? Which is acting on which to create these hells?
This is an old point, and I'm going to hit on it over and over again. But people are about as good as we allow them to be, and technology didn't enable people to be degenerate and nihilistic. They were degenerate and nihilistic before technology came along, and there was a lot of ripping the chains off the devil that brought them to that point. And I am wholly confident that if the devil was where he belonged, back in chains, that technology would not be as nearly as problematic as it was today.
I actually agree with that. I think the fault is in our stars, not ourselves. Wait, no, the other way around. You get the idea.
I get the idea.
A healthier society could have most of this technology and use it in a much more pro-social way. Mm-hmm. Although I have my extreme doubts about whether television is redeemable. But most of the rest of it...
You mean television as in like a 30-minute show that's shown with commercials?
Well, I mean, the screen itself is just a screen, but it's television as a medium. I have extreme doubts about whether that's salvageable, but everything else, computers, the internet, even the smartphones, I think a better society could use them and not have these dystopian things lurking in their id. All right, so I think we've just about run out this topic. Join us on our next episode, where by popular demand we review a few episodes of My Little Pony: Friendship is Magic. Everyone knows that Watson's favorite pony is Rainbow Dash. I personally disagree. My favorite is Sunset Shimmer, who is best reactionary pony. And I'm pretty sure Count Nothing Face's favorite is Applejack, which I have to agree she has a cute hat. So, join us next time, when we will probably be a little bit more professional than we were now. And until then, I'm signing off, and...
Slander.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
We'll be right back.